Die Sprachübertragung beginnt jetzt. Alle Teilnehmer befinden sich im Zuhörermodus.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to welcome you to our today's webinar on carve-outs. I'm very happy to welcome Ben Fielding and Jolka Berscher, both from TMF Group. We'll be focusing on carve-out, which always is a major challenge in M&A transactions. So as some of you maybe know, I had been working in M&A for the last 5 years before I had been joining this association here, Bundesverband Alternative Investments. And during this time, I also was heavily involved in a lot of carve-outs. From this time, I know carve-out always means trouble in terms of timeline and delays, and processes for carve-outs are often underestimated. Further, a lot of asking which topics are causing these delays. There are a few I would like to further comment on. First of all is IT. IT is always creating a lot of difficulties because everything needs to be separated, hardware, software, whatsoever, network, which is not an easy job in many cases. Then also talking about HR. Employees, you will often find employees with mixed responsibilities, so be aware also of involvement of work councils and unions. And in larger transactions, unions might also have to approve a carve-out, or also work council might maybe have to approve the carve-out plan. And this is extremely this can extremely be seen in France, for example, where work councils have sometimes very long periods for consideration. Another challenge in carve-outs is the selection of employees, because some employees will be staying with the old owner and some of them will be transferred to the new owner. So it's always a long discussion on selection of employees, also considering pension agreements, employee age, and other aspects. A minor thing which also often causes a lot of discussion is the canteen. So how to deal with the canteen. But I mean, this is not a major point, but also it's always something to come up with. Then we are talking about third-party agreements in carve-outs. I mean, here, be aware of agreements with logistics, with agreements for cleaning, or also lab services. All those third-party agreements need to be adjusted and prepared before the carve-out can be implemented and finalized. Further, security and access concepts need to be changed. I mean, here, if you have a large site, for example, be aware there might be new gates on the sites, or separate access ways, new streets whatsoever. This is also sometimes difficult to realize. And also utility, how do you deal with water, gas, power, and waste? Also here, all agreements and infrastructure need to be adjusted with respect to the carve-out. Another point, always interesting and time-consuming, is reporting. Often, there's no existing separate accounting for the carve-out unit, so whatever reporting is in place needs to be adjusted, which sometimes really takes a lot of time because really you have to dig into details. Further, financing. I mean, be aware of, for example, consent rights of banks to the carve-out. Sometimes, if there's a loan agreement in place, banks need to be asked before whatever carve-out can be done, and although this needs to be considered when preparing the timeline. Finally, be aware of clean teams. And I guess this is also something which will be addressed further by Ben and Violka, because for sometimes in carve-out processes, or maybe also quite often, you will have to have certain clean teams because not all information can be shared with everyone. And if a clean team needs to be set up, this also makes things even more complicated. And with this ideas and thoughts, I would like to hand over to Ben Fielding. Just one final remark. We will be having a summer break, so no more webinars in July and August, but we are happy to welcome you again to new webinars in September. Yeah, just to already let you know about what's going to be in September. And with this, please, I think Ben or Jolka, please start outlining even more details on cross-border.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to this webinar. This is Fjolsa speaking. Thank you very much, Annette, for the introduction. And yeah, thanks for hosting this webinar today on our topic, cross-border carve-outs and how to get them right. So as I said, I am Fjolsa Barischer, the commercial director here at TMF in Frankfurt, responsible for clients that invest through alternative fund structures such as real estate, private equity, infrastructure, but also supporting our clients if they intend to expand their businesses through M&A strategies, whether that's locally or globally. My background is mostly from fund and banking side. I have spent over 15 years focusing on supporting institutional clients, and they're especially pension funds, insurance companies, and asset managers to set up fund structures in Germany, Luxembourg, but also in other countries. Today, Ben and myself would like to share a survey that we have done in association with Merger Market, and as also said, the topic is cross-border carve-outs, why 1/3 fail and how to get them right. So during the presentation, we will cover the following points. I will give you a short introduction about TMF. Who are we? What do we do? Ben will share some definitions with regards to carve-out, and then I will summarize the results of our survey. Ben will finally explain using a case study to give you some practical tips. So we completed the survey in association with Merger Markets. For those of you who don't know Merger Market gives M&A professionals advanced insights on deals before they become public. So during the survey, we have asked over 200 corporate institutions and PE firms that are based in 29 countries to share with us their experiences in those highly complex transactions. So the aim was to better understand and to analyze what were the challenges they had to face in the last 3 years while they executed a carve-out. The reason why we did it is because, I mean, this is the carve-out topic is becoming very popular, and there are also another reasons why this is going to even gain more importance. So one of them is we think obviously because of COVID-19, as many companies will be forced to restructure their business and to address, so they can address liquidity issues and improve their balance sheets, but also the fact that there is a lot of dry powder in the market. So, and with this, I will let Ben introduce himself as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Fjolsa. Hello to everybody. Thank you for your time today. As mentioned, so my name is Ben Fielding. So I head up the business development in the UK and Ireland. I've been doing really different streams of M&A for about 20 years. My career started with Deloitte in Canada, and I worked then also in the Cayman Islands for a few years, and then also worked in the UK for the last 12. So sort of a variety of experience and a variety of different roles. And I've worked in the corporate services sector now for a few years, actually about 5-6 years, and have been supporting companies as they go cross-border for that time. You know, setting up entities, making sure that all the problems that you'll encounter when you go to a different country are resolved and made as easy as possible. Vyosa, I'll hand it back to you. There's the agenda for the day, as Vyosa already went through. So we'll start just a slight bit about TMF, and then I'll talk a little bit about carve-out in theory.
Yeah, so maybe just a couple words about TMF. I'll keep it short. So it's just you know who we are, what do we do. So TMF is a global provider of administration services. What we do is we support our clients to execute their expansion strategies, whether that's globally or locally, and also whether that's done through M&A expansions or through investment funds, especially alternative investment funds. We have over 120 offices in more than 80 countries, supporting our clients locally with regulatory topics, especially. Yeah, there are some countries that we don't cover. You will see them, they're marked gray in the map. That's because of political or sensual reasons. But yeah, other than that, we really cover most of the countries that are economically important. If we can go to the next slide, please, because I think I don't have the opportunity to do it. For some reason, it's not working here. Oh,
okay, Vyosa, I got you covered.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. So on this slide, actually just to give you an overview about our solutions that we cover. I won't be talking about them on detail because we want to focus on the main topic, but if there are any questions about it, happy to take them later.
Perfect. So if we step into carve-out in theory, we thought we'd just give everybody a brief introduction on what we mean by carve-out. Obviously, carve-out is part of the larger category of mergers and acquisitions, but it specifically refers to when you're looking at a particular business unit or a brand that is part of a much larger organization. And in this situation, the larger organization is looking to sell that piece off. It can be bought by either a corporate or a private equity owner. Those are the two we see most often. And really, it tends to be, it can be of any size. So we're talking hundreds of employees up to tens of thousands of employees, potentially even further. And they're oftentimes, these parts that are carved out are almost akin to, unloved siblings, if you will, as part of the larger family. They're parts that are probably not core to the business, and therefore, when the corporate is looking at its strategic future and how where they want to go and what markets they want to play in, they're really looking at taking out these non-core products. So it could be an area where the product is quite underinvested, and there's a real chance for value. And I think that's one thing when we speak to a lot of the private equity firms that invest in these or other corporates that are looking to acquire a carve-out. They really see a chance for significant returns. And while there can be different drivers between corporates and private equity, and Vyosa will go into some of the drivers that we found in our report, there are also similarities in terms of scale and really building the business. But the returns that you see on carve-outs tend to be quite good returns. Again, they're these portions of a business that haven't been invested in. And I know there's some from the institutional investor side, if you're looking at private equity or other firms that are investing in this area, you're really looking for that track record of getting those deals all the way to completion. Those delays, as we'll mention throughout this presentation, delays cost money. And so having a firm that has done this before, really knows how to drive to the end, is very important from an investor side, and really just having that project management skill to take these on. There is a lot of moving parts, as Annette said in there early on, from IT to finance to HR. It really encapsulates everything. You do tend to be leaving a corporate that the business may have been part of since its founding. It might not know anything other than being a part of that business. It can be in multiple different countries. And the case study we're going to go through later, it was a case where there was 700 people spread across 40 different countries around the globe. So it had always had a parent company that supported it, had always been part of a larger corporate. And so coming out of that larger corporate, it was a very complex cross-border transaction with very lean management. There wasn't many in terms of senior people to lead the organization going forward, and that has its own creates its own issues. Give you a there you go. We'll skip on quickly to the report here. Vilsa, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ben. So yeah, the report itself, maybe just for your information, what we will do is we will make the report itself with all the details available for you to download it on the BAI website, but you can also download it on our website, on the TMF Group website. So we have collected, as outlined, many answers to different questions from over 200 corporates and PE firms. And yeah, we wanted to understand what are the challenges. And as we know, while the deal economics of a carve-out, they can be very attractive, they can open up a lot of opportunities. They can offer private equity firms, for example, a strong platform from which they can better expand their strategies, and they can also offer faster returns. But the survey clearly also shows that the most recent cross-border carve-outs, at least the answer that we received, they did not deliver and they did not meet the expectations the PE firms and the corporates had. So along many answers, so one of them was that what they were saying was very costly because most or a lot of them took longer than expected, the transactions. And you might think, yeah, the overruns might be common, but they could definitely be avoided if you're well prepared. And they can also save money. So maybe on the next slide, Ben, if you could, they can save up to 16%. And maybe also this might not sound a lot, but given the fact that most of the carve-outs had a value over 50 millions, and some of them are even 1 billion. So that can get very, very costly. I mean, and we also wanted to understand how can those costs be avoided? So the answer that we received from a Japanese director was, well, the complexity of completing carve-outs across multiple countries is the biggest reason for the runs, because most of the PE firms and corporates, they just don't know, they just don't have the local knowledge about the legal and the regulatory issues. So this was one of the main drivers for the delay. So if you're familiar with the regulatory requirements and with the legal requirements, you're definitely better equipped to run such a transaction more smoothly. And some of them that did not have the experience themselves, they said it was a really big asset to bring in additional expertise additional expertise from the local itself that know about the legal and their regulatory issues. So maybe here we wanted to know what are the drivers and the challenges. Why do corporates and PE firms do a carve-out? So as we can see, for both parties, they have different drivers. For corporates, it's clear with 77% that the main driver that motivates them to do a carve-out is expanding their product and services across other countries. Where, on the other hand, for the PE firms, is because they're looking for value on money. So maybe on the next slide, please. So, and when we look at the challenges, we saw that the drivers for both parties in the previous slides, they were different. But if we look at the challenges seem for both parties to be the same, which is clearly, the legal and the regulatory part. So if you don't know, if you don't have the expertise on the ground, you will definitely be prepared to face some big challenges. And finally, so maybe just to summarize it, when we asked the surveyed managers what were the keys to success, so what went well. So what they said is local presence, and I think we saw this earlier, it seems to be a really important part. So this said that the slogan "Think Global, Act Global" has never been more relevant in this context. So if you have a deep local knowledge and understand the domestic business requirements, this can really help you save money, time, and frustration. And another one was preparation. So preparation is almost everything because the devil is in the detail. And if you don't have any experience from previous transactions in those markets, you should definitely consider to bring in a partner that understands the local requirements. Because complying with the domestic requirements, such as accounting, tax, ERP, and those were the answers or words that were mentioned very often. Just an example, in some markets, it can take up to 16 days to open up a bank account. While in other countries, for example, business licenses are required before the new entity can be registered for VIT. And I think Annette also mentioned some good points with regard to HR and be prepared that you have to implement or bring different teams together. So this is also something, you should be aware of. And I think if you just take some of these points into consideration, that definitely can help you to smoothen those transactions because they can be very extensive and complex. With that, I think Ben will now share a case study with you. So just to give you some practical tips, I suppose.
Perfect, thanks, Fielsa. So I think the points that have been made to date will really shine through in the case study that we are looking at as well. So in this case, so we have a carve-out with no safety net, and that's the big headline here. It was an industrial giant, so very large global corporate that was selling off a service division to a new private owner. In this case, the private owner was a private equity firm. Between the agreement and the close date, there was 7 months to turn the carve-out into a going concern, and that meant that everything had to be done along that strict timetable. Essentially, the seller was in a situation where it was you be ready or we're not selling, and was not willing to offer a transition service agreement. So, or a TSA. You'll hear the acronym a couple of times in the next few slides. And that's really critical was the fact that the firm had to be up and running. And I think that's one of the things that in these situations is quite unique. You are moving out of a large corporate. You're moving away from that safety net of having that corporate backing behind you, of having the systems in place, the benefits that are in place across the globe, the teams that you have in place as well. Oftentimes in carve-outs, what you see is a very lean team, and in this case, the three main people that were driving the carve-out from the client side were the CFO, the HR director, and a consultant project manager. So it was basically these three running a situation in which there were 700 employees across 40 countries. And so when you're looking at that, you have to deal with every country. You can't leave one behind. That's not an option. You have to make sure that things are solved within the relevant time frame across every single country, and this can be quite difficult to do, let alone within a time span of 7 months. So as we also mentioned, the devil really is in every detail. When we were brought in to work with this company, it had multiple advisors in place already. And I think what we see often is that specialist advisors will take their part. So you take the investment bank will be very concerned about the financing. On the legal side, the lawyers will get involved in looking at obviously the transaction documents and making sure all the agreements are in place. You might have a PMIs or a post-merger integration consultancy. They don't tend to generally get down though into the details of how do you make sure that the entity that we're setting up in China is operational in time so that the employees can be employed in the company by day one. And that's where we come in to really make sure that those detailed steps take place. And while each individual step in and of itself may not seem that important when you're looking at a multi-billion-dollar deal or looking across the 40 countries, but every one of these single steps can actually be a hold up to the whole process itself. So it's very important that you get these right. So in this case, as I said, the companies were in place, but when we were brought in, we were told that the entities were set up, and there's a very big different meaning to when you say an entity is set up and an entity is operational. And that was certainly the case here. So we had a lot of fine tuning to do between each country to make sure that it was set up. Easy things that might be setting up bank accounts, but when you don't have the large corporate behind you anymore, you're now setting it up on your own and setting up for a new company with a PE structure. Banks take a long time to understand how these things work. So it can be the case where you're waiting several months to set up the bank account, and therefore you need to know the timeline. You need to set things out in a step-by-step manner and know how the process flows, and that's very key to understanding when things will be ready to set up. Similar with tax and regulatory regulations. and registrations. It's very important that these things that are very simple. We've helped in a similar context. We've helped a medical device manufacturer, and they had a lot of local registrations that needed to be set up and ensured that they were in place so that they could sell their product locally. These are the little things that need to happen to make sure that you are operational and not just set up, and that's very key. Another piece is the accounting structure. So when we look at accounting structure, and we had talked to the CFO originally, his view is he wanted something that was standard across all countries. Unfortunately, it's not really such a thing as standard accounting in every country, and that's one thing that was very important in this circumstance to understand, is that to point number 4, the enterprise systems, the do-it-all ERP doesn't really exist unless you're getting something that is vastly more expensive, vastly more complex than you're going to require. So in this case, there's 700 people across these 40 countries. It was really important to get an ERP system in place that could handle 40 different countries and the local reporting that you needed to do. And that's one key thing and a key mindset change is coming out of a large corporate. You will have an ERP system, or you'll have various processes that are in place that are much bigger than just your own entity. And so when you're dealing with a carve-out situation, you really have to reflect and almost reset your mind for the new situation that you're going to be in. And the last piece is the employee transfer. As I mentioned, you have to make sure that these entities are ready to receive employees. You have to make sure benefits are set up. You have to make sure all the pieces that are in place are transitioned over to the new entities, and that's a lot harder than it sounds. If you just take a situation like benefits, when you're coming out of a large corporate that has hundreds of thousands of people across the globe working for it, the benefits programs that are in place cannot be replicated, or at least not cheaply, when you have all of a sudden 700 people across the globe. And that's a key differentiator, is that not everything can stay the same when the carve-out happens. And so you need to make sure that you're legally compliant in every country, that you make sure you investigate what's been promised, and really make sure that the mechanisms are in place to do what you need to do. Just a few conclusions on this in particular topic, and then we'll reach to some conclusions as they tie into the broader carve-out report. So the first one is that in a carve-out situation, since you are keeping all of your customers, you are keeping your markets, you're keeping the employees that you work with day to day, you're really maybe only losing sort of the overall structure, maybe the management above that not all the employees will interact with. There can be a real sense that nothing's changing, or that it's business as usual. And as I mentioned, when you're starting to set up the ERP, or you're starting to set up benefits, you really have to keep in mind that you can't just copy what was there. And that's very important to realize early on. If you want to try to copy that, it will be prohibitively expensive potentially, and it won't make sense for the current business to have systems in place that do everything that the whole previous company needed when you only use 10% of the functionality. It doesn't make sense going forward. So there's a real mind shift that you have to think about when you're going into a carve-out situation. And these are the reasons why it can be such a minefield for the project managers, for PE investors, especially as an investor, if you're looking to invest in companies that have done this. Again, that track record really is important. These carve-outs are hard, they're difficult. There's a lot of different stages to them, and to become a success, you really have to make sure that you're on top of all the different pieces that go into it. I mentioned that the specialist advisors, you want to surround yourself with people that have done this before. You want to make sure that the PE houses surrounding themselves with these people as well, and from all different aspects, because you rarely get any particular advisor that sees the whole picture, and so you want to make sure that you have every aspect covered. So the next point goes very similar to what I said. So it's the new systems, new structures. It's the processes that you now have your own global footprint. And this is oftentimes when we talk to PE houses about why they like to do carve-outs, is actually one of the highlights and one of the real positives that investors see in doing a carve-out, is that you get to create something different. You get to do something quite new, and really take a business that, as I mentioned, may not have been loved, and you get to invest in it and then expand that forward. So these are complex situations, but often ones where there's a lot of positivity that comes with it. Keys though to the deal. So I mentioned in this particular deal that we were working on, there was no TSA to be put in place, so there was no alternative, and that's something that can be quite scary, but at the same time actually drives you to action. So it meant that day one, all the payroll had to be set up. It meant day one, the accounting systems had to be set up. And so that's what we worked through with the client, is how that would happen, how we could make sure that in each country we did address that. And it really is working at that granular level to make sure that these deals are closed on time. So as I mentioned, in most countries, setting up a payroll is not difficult. In some it is. And we have that local team knowledge that can really get all the different steps and really take those forward from sort of the ground level up. And that's really quite key, is understanding what needs to be done at the ground level in these situations, so that you don't overstep the TSA bounds and walk into a situation in which you don't have any support. I think one of the worst things you can end up, and that drives a lot of drama in these situations, is where you have employees that are part of the carve-out. You've created the vision, you have commented to them how this is going to be very exciting for the company, and then come their first paycheck, they don't get paid. And those are the situations that you really want to avoid. There's a lot of change that people will be feeling, and you really need to make sure that they're taken care of as you move through these processes. So tying into the conclusions into our report. So we've mentioned throughout, it's doing your homework. That is the first step. Really making sure that you know what you're going to run into at a local level, setting up the timelines. That's quite critical. Knowing when your entities will be operational, knowing when you can actually transition client agreements, and all these sort of pieces are really important to set up along the process. And having those local advisors is really imperative. It's oftentimes you'll get something at a very high level that from an advisor on the deal level, and you're looking very high level during the deal and getting it closed. But then you have to take into account the local requirements and what's going to happen at a local level. And again, it's taking into account those local timelines. There are some delays that can be completely out of the buyer's hands, but a lot of the delays that we see are because there's not that real detailed project plan early on that take into account those local timelines. And then that's very important as you go forward in a carve-out. Point 4, I really like this point, is just to keep it simple. And this is really thinking about, these carve-outs are often very complex, but at the same time, what you want to be doing is looking at a local level, and how do you get to day one at a very simple, in a very simple way. So in a number of different examples that I can think of, how we've helped the clients is actually just get through day one. So get things set up, and we can help set things up at a local level and run local books and run local payrolls. And then we'll have a conversation with the client and saying, okay, we know you want to move to a shared service center. How do we make that happen? A shared service center is very hard to set up within a 6-month time frame. So if that's all you have when you're looking at the divestment, looking at the carve-out timeline, you really have to keep it simple and really move forward for what you need on day one, and then look forward for your future horizon and what you want to make and how you want to bring the business forward. And that's something we've helped clients with, is really that step from day one to day 2 or day 100, is looking at what is the process flow, what is the next step, and how do you get to there. And oftentimes there'll be, with the shared service center, there'll be what we call last mile considerations, so local accounting or local reporting, local taxes, local payroll that you need to do. And these things won't be covered in a shared service center. So these are things that you need to think about as you're moving along. It's really that preparation, but as point 6 makes, it's keeping your eyes on the prize. I think, in a lot of these situations, you've been working on the deal, or the senior management in these situations have been working on the deal for a number of months, if not years, driving it forward, and at some point deal fatigue can set in, and it sets in just when you're closing the deal, and there's actually a whole lot of operational decisions that you have to make, and operational aspects you need to take care of in order to make this a success, and make sure that your employees are happy, and make sure your business really goes forward with how you were anticipating when you looked at the carve-out. And that's why sort of on the last one, that's why the snakes and ladders picture was chosen for the front. Oftentimes you'll feel like it's 1 step forward and 10 steps back. Every time you dive into a bit of detail, it is 10 other questions that come up, and that's where we really stand to help. And that's, I think, one thing that this report really demonstrated was that people need help with these carve-out situations. They are complex. It's not easy, but there's significant returns to be had if you can do them and get them done really well. So I think with that, I'll close at the end and open up to any questions from people.
Great. So thanks, first of all, to both of you. This has been an extremely interesting presentation. And as said, carve-outs is always interesting. One deal is not like another. They are all different. They all have different challenges. So it's really something which is never boring. This is for sure. Maybe a few questions. So you mentioned legal and regulatory requirements shouldn't be underestimated. So could you maybe a little bit elaborate a little in more detail which kind of legal and regulatory requirements you advise to carefully look at?
Sure, no, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be different in every different context. So I mentioned one example on the regulatory side where it was a medical device company, and they had to have regulatory approval in any country to be able to sell their products. So there was a lot of upfront work that they had to go through to make sure that happened. And if they hadn't, obviously then on day 1, they would have moved out of the corporate entity that had all the approvals to being their own entity, and in which case they don't have any approvals and they can't sell, and therefore there's going to be, or they have to delay the deal from happening because of that. And as Bill has said up front, what we found in the report was that these delays are significant. We found up to a 16% extra cost on these deals. And again, the 16% might not sound like much, but when you're thinking about a billion euro deal, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to be wasted because you didn't think sort of ahead of time. So that's sort of one example on that side. On the legal side, it really is getting sort of the process flows. I mean, there's much larger legal pieces that law firms will be taking part of in terms of transitioning contracts from the old legal entities into the new ones. But again, these are pieces that you need to have the legal entities set up. You need to have all the VAT registrations done. You need to have all these pieces in place in order to make them happen. So from the legal side, it really is understanding all the steps along the way, all the different pieces that you need to that need to happen. And I've seen deals held up for for a month or two, something as drastic as that, because of one little registration that wasn't done early on. And it's not just the registration that's the problem. You know, sometimes in certain countries, the government does take a while to process these. Oftentimes there's more questions, and so something that when you think, you know, it's just me filling out a form and sending it in, it oftentimes takes a lot longer than that, and there's a very long process for it. And these are things that our local teams take into account every day. You know, they move through these processes every day and can really then give you a good view of what the actual time frame is versus what you might think at a high level.
Yeah, and then maybe also just to add on it, in some countries you have there are always different rules what to do first. For example, on the licenses, in some countries you need a license before you can actually set up an entity, and that's also required if you want to register for VIT. So those are just some little tiny examples. You just have to be aware which step you have to take when.
Okay, great. Then we received a question from the audience. As a specialist advisor, it's surely important to have extensive industry expertise on your side to help bring such deals across the finish line. In this context, are you seeing specific sectors providing greater opportunities currently for carve-outs, especially in these unprecedented times?
That's a very good question. Very good question. In terms of sector specific, I will admit, right now on the M&A side, we've seen obviously a decrease in the volume. That's to be expected given the situation. We do expect that once this situation resolves itself, though, if we sort of, or at least allows for more normalcy to take hold, there will be a lot of opportunities for carve-outs. There's going to be a lot of different companies that are looking for cash injections, looking to support their core businesses. So I think you could definitely see, with situations where the very hard hit industries, so like airlines, hospitality, potentially, carving out pieces. Maybe it's just a loan service that they provide that they no longer need. So there definitely will be some in sort of the distressed side. We have seen continuing M&A and carve out in IT, healthcare. Those have definitely continued over the last the last few months. Obviously, both are quite central to what is happening at the moment. So from a sector specific side, that's definitely what we've seen, and when we've talked to other advisors, what we hear from them as well.
Great. Then I would like to ask another question with respect to process organization. I mean, from what you said, it's obvious. It's very important to really have a good organization of the overall process, to have a really good idea of timing aspects. But what do you recommend in terms of teams? I mean, if you start a new carve-out from scratch, who should be first in the team to prepare this carve-out?
Well, that's a difficult one, and I think because you're looking at every carve-out is different, and so I mean, ideally, what you want though is as cross-functional a team as possible. And by that, you want somebody from the HR side. You obviously want somebody from the IT side. You want the finance. You want all these different aspects involved. Obviously, legal as well. And the business as well. It's very key to make sure you're considering how the things impact the business rather than necessarily just the support functions. So it's very important to have all these different aspects involved. As I mentioned earlier, that can be very difficult to do. And especially in a carve-out, so the example we went through, where it was 3 key individuals that were doing it, and they didn't have then the broad support function. We've worked with companies where, as I mentioned, so on that small end, we've also worked with companies where there's 100,000 employees around the world that we're working with, and in that case, there is a very detailed project management team, and I think that's always really key is approaching this in a way that you have a team that's going to look at this, and it's very central to what they're going to do, because day-to-day things can take up a lot of time, clearly, in a carve-out situation, because it is complex and there's a lot going on. You often have competing demands, but it is really important that somebody's looking at this and being very focused on it, because otherwise, one little misstep can lead to a cascade of issues. So that would be my recommendation, is really to make sure you have as cross-functional a team that is part of this as possible, because oftentimes there'll be just things that pop up that nobody else thought of, and that's because you didn't involve a part of the business.
Okay, and that's understood. Then in your case study, this was one without any TSAs, which is maybe one extreme, can be also including TSAs. So if you have a choice in a transaction to ask for TSAs or to agree on TSAs, then which TSAs do you think to be the most important ones?
No, that's tough, and it's going to be, again, very situationally specific. So, when we've looked at businesses where there is, where it's not necessarily back office function, but it might be business functions that need to operate together, and otherwise, if they don't, there's just not a chance at all of the business succeeding. So, oftentimes it's business demands that need to be taken care of, and those I would say are the number one. The back office functions, I think what we've seen with TSAs is, they'll always be in place, or not always, but there's obviously going to always be a demand for it. But what we're anticipating, what we're seeing with a number of the deals, is that, especially in a much larger corporate, they no longer want to have very significant terms for the TSA, and the reason is they don't want to have to look after this business anymore. It's not that it's a negative situation that they're divesting, but they have other demands. They have growth demands of their own that they want to be looking at, and so they don't want to be supporting a business for very long. And so that we've seen the TSA sort of periods shortening, or in this case there was no TSA. And it was very much, what do you do then? Do you have time to set it up on your own, or not? And in that case, again, it's just really important to take the steps, involve advisors. It's one thing we walk through with all of our clients is it's just how you want to set things up, and really what outcomes are you looking for? And then we go through that track and that process flow and those process steps to really mentally map it out, and to make sure that we can get you where the company needs to be.
Thank you. And one question you just mentioned, external advisory. I mean, a lot of things might be done in-house, others will be supported by external advisors. So in transactions like this, you will definitely have some legal advice, mostly from outside, from external law firms, also often a tax advice. So what other external advisory do you recommend for cross-border carve-outs?
Yeah, I would definitely, on the HR side again. I think that is very important. As you say, you may have pieces internally, so you may have you'll generally have legal support in these situations, because it is quite complex legally. You'll generally have somebody looking at sort of finance system setup, or how that integrates with potentially maybe a corporate that is acquiring. So you will have that. I think HR is something really not to underestimate. It's the classic saying is that your people are your biggest assets. I think sometimes that it doesn't always make sense when you're driving through all the details and all the numbers and crunching everything. But you really have to make sure that people are taken care of. Otherwise, as I said, the last thing you want in a situation, especially in a carve-out where you're really trying to forge a new path, is to make a very simple mistake, like miss the first payroll, or when you're talking about benefits with employees, there does tend to be some different benefits that you need to put in place as you're smaller than you were before. So these are things you definitely have to get HR involved in, and then obviously on the IT side, that's going to be a clear requirement as well. But yeah, I would definitely recommend. We have a team that gets involved early on. It's our consulting services implementation team that really walks through the client. Just takes the client through all the detailed processes, the things you need to consider from that operational point of view that oftentimes get overlooked.
Okay, thank you very much for all your answers and for this presentation. Yeah, I mean, this was our last question, and I hope to welcome you again, everyone in the audience. We will be having new webinars in September, so please have a look on our homepage, or maybe you enroll for our mails to be informed whenever there are new topics and dates are announced. So have a nice summer, and thanks again to TMF. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Pleasure.
you. Thanks. Big thanks to BAI. Thanks.